vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Dacă astăzi mergem spre țări pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Над страной весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
тепло, и нас не согреет треск речей под барабанный раскат. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, на! Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы, извините, что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, на! Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, два, три, марш левый, два, три, взять ряды, товарищ, на! Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rein in der Arbeiter Arbeitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Sretna pod słońcem, rasti u jaslama wiecin, rasti i cvietaj zemljo radnih ljudi, i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napuči i tome danu što se vedar budi.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы.
И он продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
С неба милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the live stream from the Marx Engels Lenin Institute. And here we are again with another one for you today, with a special look at the meeting coming up between President Putin of the Russian Federation and the latest naked emperor of Washington, this one in question being the orange naked emperor, Mr. Donald Trump. And we're going to be looking at why this meeting is taking place and what is actually the real motivation for the US imperialists in trying to do this. So let's just first of all greet everybody in the chat before we get started. So hello to Robert Svarnich, hello to Sid, hello to Will Johnson, hello to Everything Is Filtered, hello to Paul, and hello to Aid, and to YepX, and to Working Pole Incorporated, Almir, Seamus, Jenny, Victor, Ogas Cybernetics, Yuan, Anthony from Prague, Potted Rodent, and Davey from North Wales, sunny North Wales. It's sunny Glasgow today, hence the t-shirt. Hello to Jerry, David King, Javier, President Jesus, Walter Stolzing, Mark Smith, Dingo Ate Me Baby, Caustic Grip, Chandler from Portland, Alex Oliveira from Sao Paulo, Anthony. Okay, we have, and also Kamau Mweru from Chicago, Matt Parker. Good evening to you both, along with Iris Partisan, our comrade in Minsk. So, Donald Trump, having given a 50-day deadline and then a 10-day deadline, suddenly last week decided that he needed to meet Putin urgently, and it needed to happen within a week. And none of Trump's demands over the war had been met. There'd been no ceasefire. There'd been no agreement to any of the plans presented by Steve Witkoff to President Putin. So why then did Trump suddenly demand a meeting? The answer lies in the situation on the battlefield. The reason for the sudden need to meet with Putin was because the situation on the front line in the Donbass area is getting increasingly desperate for the NATO side. And I call it the NATO side because that's what it is. It is and always has been a war run by the NATO military alliance, with the most crucial roles being played by the US and the British, with the British, of course, playing a very, very important and outsized role, given their actual military capacities, but given that their specialities are intelligence, subversion, and in generally the dirtiest types of warfare, it is not exactly a surprise that they are so involved. So I'm going to just share with you on screen now a look at the deep state map. So here we go. You should be able to see that on your screens now. And you can see here, this was updated yesterday. Here is what the Americans in particular, but also the British, the French, the Germans will be concerned about. Let's just start up here in the north. You can see the red arrows here represent Russian advances. And this is all in the last day. So you can see here, right up to the top, near Kharkov, you can see some small advances there, but some consistent advances all the way up here around Kupiansk. You can see more down here. And if you follow to the line of contact, you can see some thrusts there towards Liman, ultimately with the maybe targeting a larger town or city such as Izium. But here in the Donetsk area is where things get really heated. You see pushes forward from Lysychansk. You can see Slavyansk there, in Russian Slavyansk. This is the area where 10 years ago, the very famous or infamous Russian monarchist nationalist, lunatic, adventurer, Igor Strelkov, or Gherkin, as he's actually known. We'll refer to him by his cooler name. Igor Strelkov held the town with limited resources for, I believe it was 78 days before being pushed out. And you see below that Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, etc. But what you can see here is that there is an intense push forward by the Russian forces around Konstantinovka. They're further down, pushing around Pokrovsk, up here in Bilozersk. And you can see that these Russian advances are shooting ahead now. And if the Russian advances are as successful as it looks like they're going to be, what the Ukrainian forces will face is losing a place like Kramatorsk quite quickly, or at least having it surrounded, having this whole area here from Slavyansk all the way down here to up in Bilozersk be taken within the next month or so. If the Ukrainian front line continues to collapse in the way that it has, and we know it's collapsing because even pro-NATO sources in Ukraine, such as Julian Rupke from Bild Zeitung, and also several Ukrainian Telegram channels run by enthusiastic fascists, are all now complaining that they're running out of men, that the Ukrainians who are being sent to the front line are too old, they're kidnapped, whipped soldiers who are seized off the street, stuffed in a van, stuck in locked in a building somewhere, literally locked in a building, according to some Russian Telegram channels, including one of the military channels. There's Ukrainian recruits are seized off the street, locked in a van, dumped in a hall, locked in the hall until they're ready to be sent to the front line. Then they're just dumped on the front line. They hold the Russians up for a few hours, and most of them either die or surrender. And the Ukrainians are also complaining that the Colombians, who they've been relying on, well, they're the more reliable fighters from Colombia, mercenaries, have stopped coming now. Now it's just guys with barely any military experience. So Ukraine is running out of men, running out of resources. They are burning through equipment and ammunition at a rate which can't be sustained. This is a crisis that is acknowledged by, as I said, even some pro-NATO media commentators such as Herr Rupke, but also by Ukrainian commanders themselves. This is why Trump wanted the summit. Well, I say Trump. This is why the American leadership wanted the summit. Because if this continues, then there's not going to be a lot left. Then everything will be determined by Russia on the battlefield. And there's a decent chance, if we zoom out here, that the Kiev regime will simply collapse. Because if they suddenly lose all of this and the military basically melts away and the forces holding the Kiev regime in place are compromised, then they're going to be facing severe problems. They're already facing domestic revolts, an underground resistance movement, etc. If the front line suddenly implodes and the Russians make sudden rapid advances towards the Dnieper River and there's no settlement, then we could be faced with a collapse of the Kiev regime, Zelensky and co having to skedaddle out of Kiev with their noses still white from their partying. So this is why Trump wants the meeting. It is the front line which has dictated this. He didn't get what he wanted from his 50-day deadline demand. He didn't get what he wanted from his 10-day deadline demand. So he says, okay, we must meet, but we must do it inside the US. So this is where things are. So I'm just going to stop sharing that there. Now, there is no other reason why this meeting should have been demanded as urgently as it was by Trump. The problem for Trump is that he has nothing that he can offer the Russian side. Now, in theory, and some will say that this is something Trump might do, Trump might decide to walk away. This is something which various multipolarist commentators have said that Trump could do. But of course, Trump is not a man, nor is Putin, who operates simply in a vacuum. Trump could, in theory, just say, right, this Ukraine thing is a very bad deal, incredibly bad deal. This Zelensky guy, nasty guy, unbelievable asshole. We're getting out. I've had enough. Now, he could say something like that, but his commands wouldn't be obeyed, quite simply. Now, he could come out and say that in public, but then again, the commands to cease support for the war effort in Ukraine have to go through the Pentagon. They have to go through the Pentagon's permanent bureaucracy. There is every chance that if Trump gave that order, that somehow the Congress, either in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, would make some kind of move to stop him. Now, the bellwether here is a certain Lindsey Graham, a revolting, contemptible individual from, I believe, from South Carolina, a senator, who is very much attached himself to Trump. And he is now saying that the Ukrainians might need to trade land for peace, basically, which means the word's gone out that this is what Trump's going to offer. Now, what can Trump offer that the Russians can't get anyway? I very much doubt that Trump will be offering the kind of terms that the Russians are looking for. So what Trump will probably offer is this roughly, and I say roughly, the same as what was mooted as long ago as the Biden administration, but then in Kellogg's plan, or the name Kellogg was attached to it, I doubt he wrote it, which is essentially to keep the front lines where they are, maybe with a few more concessions for the Russians on land. Maybe Trump offers some more of, shall we say, it tells the Ukrainians to pull out completely from the Donetsk People's Republic. I doubt Trump is in a position where he can offer Zaporozhye City or Kherson City, because that wouldn't fly with first of all with the Kiev regime, but mostly with the Europeans, the British, or his own party, most of his own party, and certainly the Democrats. So Trump's not in a political position where he can offer much, because bear in mind the aim here. The aim is not to end the war. The aim is to preserve the Kiev regime in order that it can fight another day. So the war will not end, it will be put on pause, which has always been the plan that is now acceptable to the British, the Europeans, etc. Freeze the front line, save the Kiev regime, including Zelensky, although he might be shuffled out if they manage to save it, rearm, retool the Kiev regime, get the some of those Ukrainians who fled to Europe forced back into Ukraine. Tell them that you're going to provide a load of money to rebuild, but the only thing you really rebuild is the military. And that will then be used to launch a new war against the Russians in a few years' time, when the Europeans and the Americans feel like that they are in a good position. That's the aim. And so any offer that is made will be made with the proviso that this is the underlying intention, and that nothing that causes the Kiev regime to potentially implode is going to be on the cards being part of the offer from the American side. So nothing concrete can be offered that addresses any of the Russian demands, as made clear that in terms of the demands that Putin made clear in July of last year, 2024, in his speech to the Foreign Affairs Ministry. So what on earth is going to happen here? Zelensky can't make concessions. He'd be finished if he did. The British, in particular, desperately need the war to continue. In fact, there is rumors swirling around that the British are getting the Kiev regime to launch another incursion into Russia even as we speak, and that this is going to be something that the Kiev regime might actually action in order to send a message to Trump. Now, this is what is rumored for this is that they are going to make some kind of new incursion into the borderland area, and that they are going to do this in order to basically train wreck the possibility of any compromised position being taken. And so here we find ourselves in a situation where even if Trump wanted to make concessions, his allies in the alliance very much do not. Now, here I'm drawing from an update from some Russian Telegram channels, which say that the Ukrainians might be trying to make an incursion into the Russian Bryansk region, similar to last year's Kursk incursion. And there is reports coming out of the Russian side, which says that there are extensive Ukrainian troop movements in the Chernigov region, and that the Russians have observed the introduction of large numbers of mercenaries from Central and South America, more reconnaissance units, and new tactical symbols on armored vehicles, and increased usage of electronic warfare and FPV drone strikes. So this is something which is clearly being actively considered. And therefore, we can see that if the Americans aren't involved in it, their partners in the NATO alliance very much are. It must be restated that the British in particular, but also the French and the Germans, desperately require a victory over the Russians, in the sense that they require their objectives in this war to be met, which are the implosion of the Putin-led system and the reimposition of pure comprador rule in Russia. That's always been the objective of the British, and they need that objective to be met so they can ransack and pillage the resources of Russia. They need that because their own system is in a deep, deep crisis, and it shows no signs of emerging from one anytime soon. Without a new infusion of literal blood into the system, British imperialism is fatally endangered. So there's no way the British can agree to the kind of end to the war that would be permanent and would mean the end of the Kiev regime that satisfied the Russian demands as expressed by Putin last year. The British, the French, the Germans, none of them can agree to that. And also, I would argue, the Americans can't really agree to it either. Even if Trump wanted to do it, does he strike you as the kind of man who would face down the State Department and Pentagon bureaucracy and Congress? Of course not. He's a blubbery coward who, with no idea of how to enforce his will politically whatsoever, unless, of course, it's his wishes are in the interest of a powerful section of the American ruling class. So this thing is going to be a complete non-starter. Now, the Russians said that the Americans made a good opening offer. Now, I do wonder what that is. There's no real confirmation as to what it might be. I suspect the Americans will, as I said, make some kind of offer on land. The Russians will try and bargain with them, but I don't see the negotiations going anywhere. The most the Americans will ever agree to is a pause, and then they will not address anything with regard to the presence of fascists in Ukraine, anything with regard to there may be some concessions around the Russian Orthodox Church. That doesn't really cost imperialism that much. But other than that, there's nothing more that they can offer without admitting defeat. So this is likely to be a farce, which raises the rather interesting question of why did the Russians agree to this meeting? And why did they agree to go send Putin to the territory of the United States? Now, I don't buy anything for a moment about it's historically Russian territory and there's Orthodox churches there, all that shite that utter crook Kirill Dmitriev talks about on his Twitter. What the likely move being made here is that, as with everything else in this war, you have to observe the leaders' actions in the context of the dynamics of the systems that they dwell within. So the class dynamic within the Russian system, as I've said on many occasions, is you've got a Bonapartist system that in Russia, which has its economic base essentially derived from the achievements of the socialist period in the Soviet Union, and it's all built off of that. It incorporates within it the various bourgeois factions, some national bourgeois factions, but also some very shaky, dubious factions, which scream a lot about the Russian nation, but in actual fact, their business interests take them in the direction of compromise with imperialism, German imperialism, French imperialism, British imperialism, US imperialism. And that's reflected in the power structure. The power structure contains many, many officials who would wish to make a deal with the West as soon as possible. Contains many officials who never wanted this war in the first place. Contains many officials who didn't even want to secure Crimea in 2014 to 15. These people are weaker than they were, but their strength, their political strength, is derived from their position with regard to US and Western European and British imperialism. And they wish to resume their business with these aspects of imperialism, and so are desperate for a deal, any kind of deal, which is why they jumped on Trump's offer of talks. Now, people say, oh, it's Putin, this, that, or the other. Putin is the chair of this particular system, which contains many different tendencies within it, including tendencies which are very anti-US and anti-NATO and want to fight the war to its conclusions. The Russian system, though, is based on, it seems to me, hammering out a consensus. And Putin, as chair of that system, doesn't like to move until he's got one. And so when what I would call the comprador element, and possibly some elements of the national bourgeois as well, decided that they wanted to jump on any opportunity that Trump was willing to provide for some kind of settlement, the Putin system dutifully moves in that direction. There will be many others who will be absolutely furious about it and don't want to pursue, don't think that this is worth pursuing at all. But the bourgeois voices scream for peace and a settlement and the resumption of business as usual, and they often get their way. This is unfortunate because it has hamstrung the Russian effort to actually overcome the legacy of the 90s and actually win this war since the very beginning. Now, as to why Putin has agreed to go to Alaska, this is an interesting question. Now, is it the case that the Americans are just going to blow Putin's aircraft out of the sky? No, they're not going to take that risk. Is it the case that the US are going to send in the US Marshals, arrest Putin and hand him over to the ICC? Again, I doubt that. That's not the real risk. It's a risk that is not negligible, though, when one considers the behavior of the United States over the years. I mean, Putin is no Saddam Hussein or Muammar al-Gaddafi, but the US did just try and kill the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei. They even tried to kill that useless buffoon, President Pezeshkian. One would have thought they would have liked him to have stayed in exactly where he was, but they did try to kill the entirety of the senior leadership of the Iranian government, who they'd been negotiating with. So when one considers this, you should, if you're Russian, approach this with very, very deep caution. Again, I don't think that the Americans are foolish enough to just ice Putin as soon as his plane enters their territory. One can't rule it out, though. When you've got a nation such as the United States or the British, who have repeatedly killed and targeted for assassination people that they have said they are negotiating with, and done it over and over and over again, then you would be a fool not to think that it's a possibility, even if it's a small possibility. These people are not only dangerous, they're desperate. They're desperate to get the outcome that they need in this war. Putin's had something like 20 plus assassination attempts made on him, he says, over his time in office. And he's been in office for almost 26 years now. That's rather a lot. That's like one a year. That's almost as many as Castro. And are we supposed to believe that it's all just Chechen separatists, disgruntled Russian bourgeois, or various other terrorist organizations independent of any outside actor who've done this? No. In the mix will be intelligence agents from the US and Britain who will have tried to kill him over and over again. Now, they've done this through cutouts. They've done this through, I don't know, Chechens, through various other terrorist organizations. But the hand of the British and the Americans is very much in there. And so, again, you would be a fool not to take it into consideration. And I hope the Russians very much are taking it into consideration, given that they have tried to kill him on numerous occasions, Putin, that is, and they are desperate. They're desperate to make any move that will win them the war. So why agree to this? I personally think that even though I don't think that they're going to shoot down his plane or something, and I don't think that they're likely to pack him off to the ICC because the US doesn't even recognize it. It would take a change of policy for them to do that, and I don't think they're going to do that. Given the knots that they've tied themselves up in over the ICC with regard to Israel, I don't think they're going to pack Putin off to it anytime soon. Some of them in the US Congress will desperately want to, but I don't think that's a risk that the Americans will take. However, I still think it's a mistake to go there because, as I said, I don't think the Americans have anything to offer. Trump can't make offers that will satisfy the needs expressed by the Russian government of the Russian Federation. They can't make the kind of concessions that are needed. So why go there? Why not insist on meeting in neutral territory? There's plenty of neutral territory that would be acceptable to both sides. I'm sure the Saudis would accept the offer. They'd probably love to do it. UAE might. Oman might. You could even look further afield. You could look to somewhere like Indonesia or somewhere like Malaysia. Places which have relations with both nations. Why stick your head into the lion's mouth when you know the lion has an appetite for biting it off? Again, the risks aren't huge. I don't think I don't think even the heads of the CIA and the various American intelligence agencies are that utterly insane. But why take the chance? Is my point. And as somebody has said in the chat, presumably the Ukrainians, but with the agreement and the active involvement, I have no doubt, of the British and possibly the United States, tried to drone attack Putin's helicopter when he was flying into Kursk. So they've tried to kill him pretty recently. Again, the reason why I doubt they will do it directly is because it's the issue of plausible deniability. They want to keep themselves one step removed. If they can kill him one step removed, they'll do it. So it does raise the question, though, given that they know that Putin's flying over far eastern Russia to get into Alaska. Are the British going to send some Ukrainians there to take a punt at his plane? Maybe, but I doubt they'll get through whatever air defense measures that the Russians have in place there. And I doubt the US is insane enough to kill him on US soil themselves. Again, if they could do it one step removed via the Ukrainians, the British would certainly do it. I doubt they'll get the opportunity now. So those are risks which are small and marginal, but not negligible. They're not insignificant. And one would hope that the Russian security forces have taken that into consideration and not just gone on a blithe assurance from Donald Trump, a man who I wouldn't believe if he came up to me and told me that the sky outside was blue. So the bigger risk, though, and I think this is the bigger problem, is that what the Americans are going to try and do is essentially browbeat the Russians into accepting a deal which doesn't meet their stated requirements. And this is the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin with regard to the US and British strategy to destroy the Putin system is, if you can't beat them via the original plan, which was stymie them on the battlefield and hit them with the sanctions and hope to destabilize the system. If you can't do it that way, then maybe you can do it another way. You can play on the tensions inside and the contradictions inside the Russian system, which include, as we said before, comprador elements who are still there and shaky bourgeois elements who desperately want a deal. If you can play on those contradictions by offering all kinds of inducements. Oh, we'll work together on developing the Arctic. We will work together to do joint investments in Russia. You can have access to the American market, etc., etc. Those kind of inducements, which the US knows very well that many bourgeois in Russia will want to jump on. You offer those kind of inducements. You try and change the balance of forces within the Russian system. Now, there are many who say that the US and the British, French and the Germans are politically clueless when it comes to the Russian system, that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, that they have no idea how it works. And that's true for the politicians. The politicians, you might as well be just having an interview with a dog than talking to them about Russia. They don't have any idea. There are those that do, though, because the information that I'm conveying to you, the information about how the Russian system actually works, is publicly available information. You can read Richard Sakwa's books. You can just follow, well, you read you want to look at the tensions inside the Russian administration, go and read the website of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. You can do that pretty easily. It's not blocked in the West. So I don't think we can write off the intelligence that the likes of MI6 or the CIA or the French and German intelligence services, or Mossad, who are part of this as well. We can't write off the intelligence that they have available to them. Most intelligence gathering is open source stuff. You look for information that's already in the public domain. It's not James Bond shit. That's like rare occasions. Most of it is done via just scouring publicly available information sources and putting stuff together. See, the understanding I've developed of the Russian system is basically just me scouring English language books by Sakwa, Conley, others, and then just using translation programs to go through internal reports from Russia. Now, if I can put that together, sitting at my desk in Glasgow, then someone in MI6 can put that together. There is a lot of stupid people work for the British government, but they do have some capable people. They understand that if they can change the balance of forces in the Russian system, they can destabilize it. This is part of what they were doing in Donbass for the previous 10 years. It's all part of the same game. You increase the pressure on the Putin system, you hope to unbalance it. And so there's many different ways which the imperialists look to crack this particular nut. It's not just about the war, though that was their ultimate move. The one they thought was going to succeed, it didn't work. So they're trying other ways now. If you can offer enough inducements to break the consensus in the Russian system, to lure the idiotic, greedy, short-sighted, weak and treacherous Russian bourgeoisie into a deal that is no good, which leaves the Kiev regime intact, which might not push it into NATO now, but it leaves the door open for NATO and EU membership further on down the line, say after 5 years. If you can do all of that, and you can get the Russian system to split, you can have the bourgeois forces defect over into the peace camp and agree to this shit deal, which will then secure the Kiev regime and allow, so you hope, them to rebuild it so it can launch a war again in a few years' time. That's the risk. That's the risk, that the inducements that are offered to the Russian bourgeois, and they will be targeted to the Russian bourgeois, not Putin himself, that you unbalance things and you get the defection of the bourgeois wholly over to the peace camp, and therefore the pressures inside the Russian system build up. So either a shit deal is signed or institutional chaos starts to break out because the system fractures. There's the risk. It's not, some American pilot coming out of the sky like he's in fucking Top Gun 2 and blowing up Putin's plane. It's not them arresting Putin. It's not even some Ukrainian MI6 plot to shoot Putin's plane down over eastern Russia. It's that. That's the risk. And it's the same risk that's always been there. It's why so many Russians, be they communists or various forms of more sincere nationalists, are always afraid of capitulation because, well, look at the track record. Look at the track record with Gorbachev and with Yeltsin. And, Gorbachev, who completely destroyed the Soviet Union on the ground under the guise of reforms and peace, who talked about, reforming the system towards Lenin's ideal and talked about global peace and harmony, only to find that global peace and harmony basically meant wholesale capitulation. So if I was Russian, I'd be looking at this and would be worried, because those forces that desire capitulation are there. They are inside the inner circle, and they might have disguised themselves for the last 3 years, but they are there, and the pressure from them is constant. There's the risk, as I said before, that it's not the assassination, it's not arrest. The risk is that the US has worked out just how to give just enough to split up the consensus inside the Russian system, but not enough to resolve any of the problems faced by the Russians. Now, let's not be overly pessimistic here. Those forces inside the Russian system desperately didn't want this war, but it ended up happening anyway. They desperately wanted it to end, but it ended up carrying on. They didn't want mobilization, but that ended up happening. They didn't want the restoration of the reputation of Stalin, but that ended up happening. Why did all this happen? Well, it comes down to the determination of the fighters in the Donbass over the last decade to carry the war on and to continue to fight against the comprador clique fascist Banderite regime that was installed by the British and the Americans in Kiev. That forced changes on a global level. That, together with the extreme pressure that the KPRF, Communist Party of the Russian Federation, were able to bring upon the Russian government to, first of all, recognize the independence of the Donbass republics and then launch the special military operation. They were the combination of the Donbass rebels, who always had a strong Ukrainian and Russian communist element to them, combined with the KPRF, who, by the way, have been materially supporting the Donbass rebellion for the last decade and still do to this day, send aid convoys to the Donbass, which features an awful lot of military hardware these days. It is their success in the battle against the comprador elements in Russia that forced this change. It's the heroic militia fighters of the Donbass. It's the communists in what was Eastern Ukraine. It's the communists in Russia who forced all of this to happen. And so therefore, there is a heavy class element to this as well, in that the Russian bourgeois can feel by this stage that the longer the war goes on, the more pro-Soviet feeling emerges inside Russia, and the stronger the KPRF are likely to get. They don't want that. They'd rather, some of them at least, a shit deal that ended the war quickly and enabled them to get back to business as usual, than this continuing strengthening of the left patriotic forces in Russia. That's another motivation for the Russian bourgeois to end the war. So these are the risks that are in play here. This is my opinion on this. Others like Brian Berletich have said similar things, and I think there's a fair amount I agree with him on. I don't agree with him on the politics of the situation, because I don't think that he, as a non-Marxist, properly calculates and calibrates what's going on inside the Russian government and inside the American government. Then the role of the masses, as always, with most of these multipolar analysts, is always left out. The role of the Russian masses got us to this point, and the Russian masses, I don't think, will tolerate the kind of shit sellout deal that the bourgeois want. That's the other side of this. There's too many men who've fought and died, and too many men who've lost limbs, been wounded. There's too many families who have sacrificed too much for the Russian government to capitulate on some utterly shitty deal now, so that the Russian bourgeois can get back to squirreling their money away inside London. That would produce a revolt inside of Russia. I'm almost convinced of it. So that's my take on the situation. We will see what happens in a few days' time when the summit begins. I'll be watching it very carefully, and we'll be doing another analysis of this on the Decline and Fall show coming up later this week. So now we will pause and turn to questions and comments from you, the audience. So let's go up here and see where we are. So hello to Mushkin from Roasting Gloucestershire. Hello to Bertram Clement. Hello to Nicole watching from Ireland. Hello to TG Wilson. Hello to Mike Patrick from Washington County, New England. Hello to James Goblin out there in the once and future socialist Yugoslavia. Hello to Alistair Page McGill. I got your email. I will be replying to you. Sid says UAF, Ukrainian armed forces, don't have adequate troops anywhere along the front line. Yes, indeed. Hence the desperation. Aid says the Ukrainians resorted to recruiting Mexican organized crime fighters as well. Well, if the money's right, they'll go. Now, they may want to get out of there pretty quickly. Chairban says, is it possible that the Russian armed forces advanced already in that direction, considering the initial blackout in the sector? Interesting question. Come back to that in a future episode, I think. Mike Patrick says, long live the resilient peoples of the Donbass and free Palestine. A worthy sentiment indeed. Matt Parker says, I think a deal is close. Otherwise, I doubt this meeting will be taking place. I don't really agree with you there. I don't think that as I said, I don't think the Americans can offer any sort of actually proper deal that would address the Russian concerns. Alistair Page McGill says, why would the Russians even believe that Trump and the US would keep their end of the deal? Well, he shouldn't believe it. Well, he doesn't believe it. How many times has he said correctly in interviews that American presidents change, but the policy remains the same? He said that in his interview with Oliver Stone 10 years ago. So he knows this. He said it again recently that he doesn't that he's seen what Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump again. 6 American presidents come and go, and the policy always remains the same and will remain the same. The problem isn't Putin, because he seems to understand this. The problem is the system that exists around him and the balance of class forces contained within it. Pavel Linovsky says, I have just read the introduction to Das Kapital by the renegade Kautsky from 1926. It is written disgustingly condescendingly towards the working class and treats them like sheep. Well, what do you expect from a social democrat? I mean, honestly, I don't know if you've got a copy of Das Kapital from 1926. That's why you're reading it. But why read anything from Kautsky after about 1913? I mean, some of his previous work is very good, but by that stage, the guy was a complete sock-dem muppet. Best disregarded, to be completely honest. But it's no surprise that he's a disgusting, condescending buffoon who regards socialism as a gift which he's offered from on high by the lords of social democracy in their sainted bourgeois parliamentary chambers. And those rough chaps from the working class then should not interrupt the blessed parliamentarians in their most sacred deliberations. Just these guys were fucking Roman patricians or something. Fuck Kautsky and all those who follow him. Almir says, I saw your interview with Alina earlier today. It was excellent. Well, if you haven't seen that yet, be sure to head on over to the Decline and Fall Substack page or YouTube page and watch the interview I did with Elena Xenofontos, Cypriot communist, analyzing the history and current struggles of Cyprus for true national liberation. Be sure to check that out. Mike says, Russia reducing their counteroffer from all 4 of the Southeast republics to 1. Donetsk strikes me as yet again reasonable proposal. Kiev cocaine clown should, of course, grab it with both hands. He won't. He might not get a choice. If indeed they just basically says, give us the contact line plus the rest of Donetsk. That's a deal that the US might choose to make because they can't really do much to uproot Russia from Zaporozhye or Kherson region. Now, give them the rest of Donetsk. Now, that's an interesting one. Now, the Russians within a month or two will probably take the rest of Donetsk anyway. So initially, I don't think that the US will want to do that. So this may, if anything, this may be the beginning of a process which basically concludes with the Russians taking what's left of the Donbass, and then an informal deal being reached. Who knows? Zelensky can't grab jack shit. If the Americans want to take that deal, they will have to tell him that he's taking it, and if he won't do it, then he'll be replaced. Because that's a deal that the Americans would be happy with. Now, would the British be happy with it? No, but it could be sold as a win. That's the truth of it. If it leaves the Kiev regime intact, then the British can probably sell that as a victory. There is a difficulty, though, because what's left in Donetsk, there's still like an immense amount of like defenses that the Ukrainian side, with the assistance of the US, built over a number of years. If the Russians take that and move into them, then that's a lot of investment in military infrastructure gone down the pan for the Kiev side, for the NATO side. So what may happen is that offer is on the table. It isn't initially taken. And then the Russians basically fight to the point where they make it a reality anyway. And then the US grudgingly accepts it. That might be what's going on. We'll have to see. Now, the difficulty for the Russians is if that then leaves the Kiev regime in place, well, what happens with regard to the whole denazification angle? Because they'll still be running essentially a fascist state that is essentially a puppet regime of the imperialists, and it will continue to be a puppet regime of the imperialists. And again, like they will continue in the same way to integrate Ukraine into NATO. This won't call it NATO. That's the thing. The US will say, "Oh well, no NATO for 10 years." But you can do a lot of things to integrate a country into NATO without actually declaring it to be so. DE says, I get the feeling that half the trouble with Trump, US, is trying to sell a defeat as a win, media-wise. Well, that is, of course, a constant problem. Everything is filtered, says face-to-face negotiations allow Western oligarchy to get information outside of their echo chamber. A face-to-face meeting conveys new incentives to consider a joint Arctic Silk Road. Well, I don't think that's ever going to happen because of the various different issues that the US cannot possibly get a resolution on. With regard to the Russians, I mean, what they require from the Russians is complete capitulation and collapse, and then to just hold fire for a while the US gets to stage its provocations, and hopefully they hope score some kind of victory over the Chinese, which they're not going to get. But basically, this is just an attempt to keep things where they are. It says there's enough pro-Ukrainian nutcases in the US who could be manipulated into attempting it. Yeah, but I doubt they'd attempt it on US soil. Look, these people aren't brave. They're not, or are they particularly suicidal? They know what would happen. I mean, the Russians have a dead man switch on their nuclear arsenal for a reason. Like icing the Russian president inside the United States, not something which I see is likely to happen. Doing it inside Russia or doing it on the border with Ukraine, doing it via a bunch of Ukrainian stooges, yeah, I can see them doing that. Doing it this way, no. Are the US spreading, this is Molotov Cocktail saying, are the US spreading their particular brand of freedom and democracy in the Baltic states and trying to do the same in Belarus? Oh, yeah, they'll try and do the same in Belarus. I doubt it'll work, though. Even though Lukashenko is going to retire in a few years' time, I mean, he's built a system there which will probably last beyond him. and which is supported by a broad spread of the population. The opposition are a bunch of despicable compradors and have completely disgraced themselves. So I don't see it being a successful color revolution. Plus, the Baltic states are a terrible example of what happens when a country adopts the US path. They completely fall to pieces. So, no, I don't see it as being something that's a risk in Belarus for the time being. Almir says, yes, I also dislike that global peace and harmony BS coming from Chinese officials. Yeah, because it's not true. Because it's not possible. The US cannot agree to global peace and harmony, even if various presidents wanted to. They require the destruction of their rivals. They require now, to get themselves out of the hole they're in, the destruction of Russia and China if their imperialist bloc is going to be preserved. Because that's not just the destruction of Russia and China, it is as the Soviet Union was when it went down. Removes a barrier to the exploitation of many countries across the world, such as Venezuela or Cuba or Burkina Faso now, or Mali or Niger, or other places that have aligned with the Russians and the Chinese. So the prize isn't just those places, though those would be gigantic in and of themselves. It's all the places which have gained more sovereignty by aligning themselves more with Russia and China. The game here is incomparably large. TL Shiv says, I think it's going to be Trump demanding all of Russia's rare earths, gas, oil, etc., or Putin gets arrested. No, I don't see that happening. Whatever, I think heavy blackmail will be employed to financially benefit the USA. Well, they'll try all kinds of things. None of them will probably work, though. And then again, they're not going to arrest Putin because they can't put him on trial in the United States, and also it would lead to in all likelihood, a Russian nuclear response, which again they're not stupid enough to do that on their own soil. Again, someone else's soil, maybe. Is Jacobin still trying to make Kautskyism happen again? Asks President Jesus. Yes, they've been trying to make it happen for a number of years. Social democracy with rabidly imperialist characteristics is what Jacobin is all about. That's why there's so many people in Jacobin who are associated with Jacobin and the DSA who are Zionists. The Russians would be mad to trust Trump, says Citizen K108. Well, indeed, they would be, but there's plenty of madmen in the Russian bourgeoisie. Never count out the ability of a bourgeoisie to deliver a defeat to themselves, just so that they can grasp desperately at the markets offered as a carrot by the US imperialists. Nehat says, good thing it's not Istanbul this time, at least, for at least, because nothing good ever comes out of these things. True. Ex-CIA man Larry Johnson says Ukraine has been well integrated into NATO via military exercises since 1995. That is true. There's been NATO integration have been going on for 20 plus years by the time of the coup in 2014. I believe the very first agreements were 94, so well over 20 years. So this has been a long-term project. They're not just going to give it up. It's too strategically important. Iran might preemptively invade Azerbaijan. Doubtful at the moment. Depends. I mean, Azerbaijan could be, basically is just a disgusting comprador regime run by the British. That's why they are now making noises about more and more aggressive anti-Iranian noises. There is a fair chance that they were involved in the assassination of President Raisi, the Azerbaijanis, that is. And it's been shown that Aliyev is just a British puppet, with the US and the Israelis having some influence over him as well. He's just a pathetic gangster who has just robbed Azerbaijan blind for him and his wretched crime family for 30 fucking years. And so if his masters in London, Washington, and Tel Aviv and Ankara told him to stage a provocation on the Iranian border, he'd probably do it because they own him. So don't rule out that happening. I don't see it happening in the immediate few weeks, but there's bound to be another American attack on Iran. Just a question of like how they structure it. So don't rule out them using the Azerbaijan route. Yeah, as Nehat points out, the Zangezur corridor is going to be given to the USA, which means like US owned territory is going to be between Iran and Russia. It's like this is like a monstrous like fucking disaster. Now I doubt that the US is going to stick an army in there. They don't have the men to do it. But it just enables them to like fuck with Iran more. I mean, Iran's probably the priority for that part of the world right now more than Russia is. But it'll end up with fucking, if they manage to turn Azerbaijan into the Ukrainian, into the Iran's Ukraine, basically, then it'll end up with Azerbaijan getting fucking squashed. And all for what? You know, so Aliyev can pocket millions and billions of dollars. So him and his repulsive family can seek exile in London. This is the disaster of the post-Soviet states. All of the people in them get sold down the river and some of them turned into just cannon fodder for a puppet state. And Azerbaijan is a puppet state. Kiwi Corner 888 says the deal with the two countries, with the corridor between Iran and the two countries for 99-year agreement is a win for Trump. It's a win for US imperialism, yes. They will put a NATO base there. Of course they will. They'll put something there. Anything to let them get an angle on Iran. And it's a colossal failure of like the Armenian national bourgeois to combat the comprador bourgeois who are now taken over in Yerevan. And it's, people say it's a colossal failure of Russia and Iran. Other than invading these countries, there's limited amounts you can actually do. I mean, in theory, the Russians could have stormed in there and shot Pashinyan or something, but that's not something that the Russian government wanted to do. It's a failure of Russian like soft power, should we say, that they weren't able to recognize the threats being posed to their interests. But in reality, like, there's very little that the most a US base could do in that corridor is launch sabotage operations, destabilization operations, intelligence operations into Iran. Yeah, they'll do all that. I mean, they're doing all that anyway. But they're not going to be able to stage an invasion from it. That's not something they're going to be able to do. So it's just more of the same, basically. It's not good, but it's not the disaster that some are painting it as. What effect may this meeting have on American travel to Russia? Seeing Lenin's mausoleum seems an unlikely reality. Well, I think Americans can get into Russia, but you just got to go via a third country. So there's no direct flight, I don't think, but you can go via Istanbul, I think, or you can still. I don't know if the land crossing is still open from Poland to Belarus. There's certainly heavy restrictions on it, but via Turkey or via one of the Central Asian countries or via China, yeah, you can go that way. Via the Chinese. These days, you can go via North Korea. The Pyongyang Moscow train has apparently resumed. There's now I think it's takes something like 2 days over land. Almir says via Belgrade. So there's ways in if you're an American citizen. It's just no direct flight. Cost you more. Citizen Kane says US is bluffing on everything. They're bluffing on a lot. They are an empty shell. Not completely. The only thing they are leagues ahead in is soft power, media, and bluster. They have a certain amount of weaponry that still works, but they don't have the military capacity to take on Russia directly, nor do they have the military capacity to take on Iran. If they'd had that, they'd have done it already. They don't, nor are they going to get any better anytime soon. What they retain is the ability to do slightly bigger versions of what the British do, which is sabotage operations, terrorism operations, etc. Seamus says Jacobin didn't mention Palestine during the first full year of the genocide in Gaza. I didn't know that. I hadn't checked. I mean, I don't read Jacobin mostly. It's a fucking pile of shit. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, though, given the Zionist nature of these social democrats. Anthony asks, do the comprador bourgeois elements in the Putin government have any influence on the military? Yes, some. I mean, like, corrupt elements in the Russian military were very widespread. I mean, corrupt elements in many militaries are widespread. I mean, you want corruption, take a damn good look at the US military. I mean, that place is stinkingly corrupt. But this is Russia we're talking about, and the corrupt elements who, of course, are taking bribes from all kinds of people, selling off various things, possibly selling secrets. Yeah, those people are there. Do they have a big influence on it? They have enough influence in it. I mean, they are slowly being purged as the war goes on. Another reason the US would want to bring the war to a close is to stop the shutting down of their networks that are left, any networks that are left inside the Russian state system. So there's some. They have the ability to cause damage, certainly. Citizen Kane says, how will workers triumph on a global scale? Interesting question. I will put that in the Q&A for Thursday. The problem with the Zhangzhou corridor is it will be a weapons and funding transfer zone from Turkey into the Central Asian republics. Yeah, of course it will. Look, I don't mean the thing you can accuse like Russia and Iran of is like a stunning refusal to see the Turkish regime for what it is, which is like it's a pure ally of the US and the British. Erdogan makes a lot of noise, but fundamentally, he's still a tool of the US and the Brits. That's what his role is. And he'll be running all kind of destabilization operations to gain influence in the Central Asian republics to work directly against the interests of China and Russia. Like, the Turkish regime is just a massive source of like pro-NATO instability manufacturing. That's what the Erdogan regime does for its master in London. Aid says, in a similar vein, what do you make of the Russia-Cuba-Yucatan corridor that is being negotiated? I've heard of this. Like Russia, China, and Cuba all involved with creating new waterway links to between the Caribbean and the Pacific. Well, I hope that they succeed, and also I hope that the Chinese are taking seriously the investment in Cuba. Or at least that's what I've read, so that they get to secure Cuba against the U.S. sanctions regime. Certainly, it seems that the Xi Jinping leadership takes that seriously. So I hope that gets pushed forward. What is Trump hoping to gain by giving Alaska back to Russia? Well, if that was the point, then then it'll be hilarious. If Trump just came on TV and says, I have decided that the territorial concession I'm going to make is I'm going to give Russia Alaska back because it's a terrible shithole. I didn't even enjoy that TV show Northern Exposure in the 90s, terrible show with that guy from ER, awful. I've decided to give it back. I don't like it anyway. It's just full of meth labs and guys with no teeth. They can have it. If Trump came out and said that, hilarious. Give him the Nobel Peace Prize now. And just to see the response, the stunned response from the Washington political insiders, like, can he do that? Very, 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 very hilarious, because it's just not going to happen, but hilarious to contemplate. Question about what's happening with the Wagner Group. That's an interesting one. I think what happened there was a combination of things. One, Prigozhin's ego running out of control, which is a big part of it. But also, there is clearly a play being made there by the US and the British to influence Wagner, and that's certainly something which has gone on. And quite what the truth is, we'll never know. But it's clear now that somebody in the Russian security services offed Prigozhin and his lieutenants a few months later. So what was going on there, we will never know until some serious declassification gets done. And I can't see either side wanting to do that anytime soon. Nehat says, Turkey is part of NATO and got economically destroyed and kidnapped the nation in 2013 and 2019. Now it is a puppet of NATO. Our government is completely submissive to NATO. So, Nehat, can you just confirm that you're talking about the economic crises that happened in 2013 and 2019? Is that that sort of that basically made the Erdogan regime a complete cuck for US and British imperialism? I think that's my interpretation of what you've said there. Correct me if I'm wrong. David King says, thoughts on Trump's drug war? Is this a threat to South America? Attacks, then regime change plans? Yeah, I mean, I'll address that. We'll address that in the Decline and Fall show that's coming up later this week. But basically, it's what I've been talking about for a while now, which is that the whole war on terror thing's worn out, really. So bring back the drug war and declare that you need to intervene against the cartels in Venezuela and Mexico so that you can destabilize the Scheinbaum and the Maduro government. So that wouldn't be a surprise if they did that. President Jesus asks, best hidden gems on Moz films. Watch the quintet called Liberation, which is the story of the advance from the Battle of Kursk all the way through to the Battle of Berlin. That's like an absolute classic. Plus, watch the Soviet version of War and Peace. Brilliant film. Right, I have got to go because I've got more work, editing and writing to do tonight. But I hope that you've enjoyed this stream. Hope you've gained some information from it. And I'll be back answering your questions on Thursday of this week. Tune in tomorrow night for the latest in our series entitled Busting Anti-Communist Myths. We're going to be doing an episode entitled Communism and Freedom. So be sure to tune in for that. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Couldn't do this without you. And we will be back with you tomorrow. Until then, here's some music.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.